Hey everybody, it's Alex Miller at Capnion here. I'm going to continue talking about corporate governance. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and I'm also going to talk about Anthropic today. The most popular story along these lines is, of course, OpenAI's got this weird situation where they're both for profit and not for profit at the same time, and maybe this is a problem, but I've already talked about that quite a bit. And I think AI in general has a lot of unusual corporate governance you should be worried about. And so I'm going to tell you about some of the other examples. So in a second, I'm going to get into Anthropic, which is a B-corp, a public benefit corporation. It's easiest to understand this by way of contrast. Your typical for-profit company is supposed to consider returning profits to shareholders. And a lot of people feel like this makes companies prone to doing evil stuff. The idea of a B Corp is that they're allowed to consider other concerns, protecting the environment, doing right by workers, etc., etc. This sounds really great. And I'm not going to argue it isn't really great. I'm going to try to give you a sense of how it might go bad and what to look out for. It's worth emphasizing it's a really new thing, so there's no track record. And I don't really think there's any grounds to say anything empirically about it at all. Okay, so let's start way zoomed out. What is the stock dialogue about what goes wrong with bad corporate governance? One obvious danger, and if you know to look out for it, you should fear it because it happens a lot, is that the top executives at the company treat the company like their personal property and nobody can stop them. So a specific example that comes up quite a bit, maybe a really big company has good reason to buy a bunch of private jets to fly its executives around. But jets are really, really expensive, and it's hard to justify ROI on really, really expensive things just because the return needs to be really, really high. So there's a hazy line where at some point the executives could be said are flirting with just spending the corporation's money trying to have a good time and bling out. And I don't want to get in here to specific examples. People don't always agree. I would say that occasionally it is legit to have a corporate private jet. But I think people also definitely go too far. In the cases where people go too far, you can often tell a story about, well, this company's board doesn't really look like it has the teeth to rein these people in that it should have. Okay, so stock dialogue, the danger is that the corporation becomes the property of top executives. Where does public benefit corporation fit into this? How do you measure public benefit? People, when they get into arguing about values, how important is the environment? How important is workers' rights? Agree basically never. People, and politics is exactly where we shout at each other until we're blue in the face about what is kind of optimizing for public benefit. And so this is bad news for corporate governance because if you compare it to maximizing profits for shareholders, well, that's very cut and dried and easy to quantify. You can say very tangibly, well, what kind of profits are getting returned to shareholders? Oh, this similar company that's you should be able to emulate is returning XYZ profits to shareholders, and you aren't, and you have all these jets. Maybe you're not living up to your obligations. If you introduce all these moral concerns, it becomes much squishier to evaluate. Is the management of the company really doing its job? And when you make it really squishy, you potentially enable the top management of the corporation to play a lot of weird politics. And it could sometimes be sincere that they really believe they're doing the right thing and they really are doing their job. And it's probably going to be true in other cases that they're having a lot of fun flying around on private jets, and some other kind of theater somewhere else is a way to argue that, oh, yet I am doing my job. And once again, it's really about returning profits is very cut and dried and quantifiable and objective. And public benefit is not very quantifiable and squishy and subjective. And especially for a large company with a lot of shareholders, squishy and subjective is pretty bad news. So you can see, if you look at the ESG world, this is a category of investing, environmental, social, and governance, looking for companies that people think are doing the right thing. It's very controversial and very contentious. And part of the story is that, well, people don't really agree on all these things and what kind of priority they should take. And a public benefit corporation is sort of baking that tension and confusion into the legal structure and the governance of the corporation at a fundamental level. So having said all these things, I am not arguing here that public benefit corporations are bad. It sounds great. There's really not a whole lot of track record to judge. Just to give you an example, once again, Anthropic, which is a generative AI company, they're competitor to OpenAI. They make an LLM called Claude. They are a public benefit corporation. I think it's very interesting that everybody in AI has some kind of novel corporate governance structure. And if I was going to make any kind of claim about these corporate governance structures, well, novel is not great. It's really nice to have it done the way people have been doing it. And you don't want to learn something about corporate governance in one of your investments, I don't think. You would like it to be kind of transparent and boring. And these things are setting us up for excitement in a way we might not enjoy. So I would follow these things closely if I cared about AI, especially if I was an executive or a business leader. It's already been demonstrated once that these governance situations can spiral in a frightening way that could affect your ability to do business. So I'll try to keep you guys posted out there and keep your eyes open. It's a dry issue, but it's important.